Hey, good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. I think we're just about ready. We'll wait for folks to settle into their chairs. Hope everyone's having a pretty good summer so far, and I really appreciate that you're here on the last week of August. So we're just going to begin the 11th meeting of the Disabilities Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee. As before we begin the meeting, I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting today on the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nations, the Haudenosaunee and Huron-Wendat, and home to many diverse Indigenous people. And you'll note that the City of Toronto is making their declarations and acknowledgements at the beginning of all our standing committee meetings and at City Council meetings. And of course, we want to thank the Aboriginal Affairs Committee for bringing this to the forefront. And of course, Councillor Layton is the co-chair of that committee. So thank you very much for all that work. You'll recognize that there's a goldenrod. Oh, they don't have it. Okay. So I apologize. You don't have what I have, so I won't mention it. But what I'd like to do is actually just have an introduction of those who are in the room. That's oftentimes very helpful for us to identify who's actually here. And I'm going to start to my very far left side. If you can just state into the microphone, if the microphone is directly in front of you, is your name and your organization if you are representing one today.
Hi, good morning. Mazen Aribi, ACAT Chair.
Matt Haig, Senior Planner for Accessibility, TTC.
Jonathan Wood, I'm the chair of the Toronto Accessible Sports Council.
Stephanie Osario, committee member.
Joe Napper, committee member.
Terry Lynn Langdon, committee member.
Mike Layton, City Councillor, Ward 19, Trinity Spadina.
Rahim Amullah, Vice Chair.
Nicole Cormier, Accessibility Consultant, City of Toronto.
Kristen Wong-Tam, Chair of the Committee, Councillor for Ward 27.
Stick, City Clerk, Secretariat.
Yin Brown, is it on? Okay. Committee member and also representing Alliance for Equality of Blind Canadians.
Martin Purcell's committee member.
Wendy Porch, committee member.
Carmen Burkhart, committee member.
Lorene Bodiam, advocate for people with disabilities, Parks, Forestry and Recreation Division.
Thank you very much. Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. I'd like to ask if Terry Lynn could actually start our meeting. I know that she has an announcement to make and a request of us.
I wanted to acknowledge the murders of the 19 individuals that died in Japan in July. And I think that the people certainly on this committee are aware that there are a lot of social forces and attitudes about disabled people and the lives of disability, people with disabilities that greatly contributed to this violence. Also, I've been following things that have been happening about the events on social media and such. And an important thing that's come about is that we still don't know the names or the roles of the individuals that died. So I did want to have like a moment of silence to recognize that tragedy because I feel it's been significantly under-recognized because of attitudes held about people with disabilities and in particular an under-recognition of violence and how that impacts the disability community in particular.
Thank you very much, Terry Lynn. And so just to contextualize, and I think she's done an excellent job of doing so, and I'm sure that this particular group doesn't need a reminder. However, because our meeting is being broadcast throughout the building, I'd like to just say that on Tuesday, July the 26th, 2016, 19 people were killed and 26 were injured in a stabbing spree at a facility for people living with disabilities, which was located west of Tokyo, making it Japan's deadliest mass attack since World War II. 9 men and 10 women, ranging from the ages of 18 to 70, were killed in the attack. This is an incident that we don't ever want to see repeated, but yet I know that this is just a symptom of what we see on a regular basis with respect to violence inflicted upon people living with disabilities. And there were at least another 25 residents who were wounded in the attack in the town of Tsukiyu Yamaura-un, a facility for mentally and physically disabled people in the Sagamihara town, which is only about 40 kilometers southwest from one of the biggest cities in Japan, and that's Tokyo. So I will be moving a motion of condolence at City Council to recognize this particular incident. And for now, what I'd like to do is ask us for a moment of silence to reflect. Thank you very much. Okay, if anybody needs a break before we even start the meeting, you're welcome to take one. Certainly, it's not easy, but a reality that we have to contend with and confront. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, can I have someone move the confirmation of the minutes from our June 29 meeting? Thank you very much, Stephanie. So moved. Let's go and proceed and take a look at our agenda. We actually have a few items. So the first one is the chair's report. That's, you know, that as point 1. I'll deliver that shortly. And then we have item number 2, which is the City of Toronto web development, and we will hold that for presentations from staff. We also have, following that, item number 3, a presentation from staff once again, which is around the accessibility in the Toronto Public Service. And then item number 4, the Disabilities Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee Working Group recommendations. And that is all that's before us. Would anyone like to hold down those items? Because item 1, 2, and 3 will be dealt with, but item number 4, I suspect we'll have some hearty discussions on. Okay. Stephanie? Okay. I'm going to hold that.
Sorry, Councillor. I was actually thinking about asking whether we could add one more agenda item relating to the ramp issue outside of restaurants and conflicting city policies, because I'd like to see if we could discuss making a motion. I think if you want to work with me or the clerk offline to see if we can get a motion onto the floor, I am actually going to address how to introduce motions and add items to the agenda in my report. And we may have to wait till the next meeting, just because I think we want to make sure we work through it very carefully, what the language of the motion would be. Is that all right? Okay. Okay, so the chair's report would have been circulated to you earlier. I had some summary notes that would have been attached. The first thing is to say that it's actually been a pretty quiet summer, but I think that doesn't mean that work isn't being done. I had a meeting as the chair of DAAC with the CEO of the Invictus Games, which was held on August the 11th. It was a very productive meeting. I was asked to circulate the program, which is an info. It's almost like an introductory piece to Invictus Games, but I don't have it electronically, so unfortunately I wasn't able to advance that to you earlier. However, as soon as I get it from the Invictus Games, I will share that with you. The Invictus Games is going to be taking place in 2017. It's a very exciting time for the Games itself. It's actually profiling and highlighting the full lives of men and women who served in the military, who were injured, and this will involve the City of Toronto as the host city. So I had proposed to the CEO that perhaps members of our committee can get involved. I think it's actually very important that when these international hosting opportunities come to Toronto, is that we actually build out a real meaningful people's legacy as well. So oftentimes we see large facilities being built for the Pan Am Games, but what is the legacy behind left by the Games? And I think that there's an opportunity for learning, there's an opportunity to have a better understanding of how people who are living with disabilities are affected. And so there's going to be a lot of media attention to the Games, and I thought that it would be great for us to somehow participate. So we've been invited to join a working group, but it was not, I don't have the names of the working group that are available. So I will be calling upon members of the committee once I have more information about the working groups, where you can insert yourself if you want to participate. So then you can represent our committee at the Invictus Games. So that's the first thing. And then another item that came up for discussion in between our last meeting was that Terry Lynn raised a really important issue, and one that we want to be able to definitely address. And that was to ask the TTC to develop a policy for accommodating passenger safety at frequent stops, at stops that are in between the scheduled stops. So in the evening time, you have the request stops in areas where buses are traveling, where the stop doesn't have to be exactly at the TTC designated bus stop, but it is. But we should be considering whether or not that is something that we extend to people with living with disabilities. And so while not all bus stops are up to code, and they certainly should be, we need to find out whether or not there's an opportunity for the TTC to think through and develop a policy to address this service gap. And I know that, just to share with you, the process of how a letter of this nature would go is that if we as a committee move a motion here, it will then have to be advanced to the executive committee, because we don't necessarily, because that's just the process of City Hall and the committee. The executive committee will then pass that and move it to council. Council will then adopt that and move it to the TTC board. So the recommendation is from our clerk is that perhaps a faster route is to have myself work with Terry Lynn to draft a letter that will reflect what she wants in that letter, and we'll send it directly to the TTC making the request. So I bring that to your attention largely because we want to just ensure when we are introducing new items onto the agenda, number one, it has to be cleared through a process that the item is ready to be addressed on the floor of the committee today. And if it's not, then we'll probably have to defer that and work on it offline. But I wanted to make sure that it's very hard to introduce new items by way of verbal requests at the committee on the day of. It should be vetted through beforehand. There has to be prepared text that will be very clear on what it is you're looking for from the committee with respect to an action. Even if it leaves the floor of this committee, it needs to be in writing. So that's why it's very important. If you have an issue that you want to raise, then we will be able to process that and place it on the agenda in such a fashion. And I will work with you on the wording of the request. And we also have the staff who are prepared to provide assistance. And so that's pretty much the conclusion of my report. I see Terry Lynn inching to ask a question. So please ask your question.
Just that the motion that I proposed is specifically addressing regular bus stops that have been deemed inaccessible. I do see where you're going with the second part. I did also talk to Melissa about that. But it was more, I was like, Melissa, I feel like that's a wish list. I just want this thing done first.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why don't we work on that offline? And we've just informed the committee that this is something that will take place, and we'll send it directly to the TTC probably by the middle of September. I don't think it'll take too long to finish wordsmithing it.
Okay.
Okay.
In terms of doing things offline, I still feel it would be advantageous to email to the committee when someone has like a motion or an idea.
Yeah, so what we want to do is be able to get to get the idea to a place where we can actually have a discussion about that, and the discussion place is actually not in the email forum. It still needs to be placed on the agenda, and that's what I will do as the chair. I'll work with you on the language, but we need to have something to respond to. If you want to have conversations with each other and talk about what it is you want on the agenda, that's certainly you're more than welcome to do so. But what we're trying to avoid is to have a lot of email conversation about a matter that's actually not before the committee right now. So we want to be able to place it on the agenda in an open forum and to let the committee then respond to it that way. Yeah, we've dealt with that before. I'm not going to bring it up again. Okay, so a motion to, oh, sorry, Wendy?
Good question. Just to clarify, so then if we want to put something on the agenda, we should be emailing you?
Yeah, so if you email myself or Melissa, we will work with you on the actual language, just because sometimes you need to get it properly before us, and the clerks will actually usually give us a lot of assistance to make sure that we're actually even directing into the right policy space so that staff can adequately deal with it. Yeah, so that's how we would be introducing new items to the agenda. Yeah. Oh, Nicole is suggesting that I remind everybody that we need at least 1 month in advance to get that onto the agenda properly. Okay? Okay, so a motion to receive the chair's report, please. Great, thank you, Wendy. And so now we're moving on to item number 2, City of Toronto website development, and we have Jill, who's our program director from Web Revitalization and Integrated Web Service Delivery Channel. What a title! Who will be presenting us with a presentation.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me over to the committee to present about the web revitalization and give you all an overview of what we're doing to enhance our toronto.ca website. I'm very pleased to be here. Before I give you what the objectives of Web Revitalization Project is, let me just give you a couple of minutes of history of what Web Revitalization Project is all about. It's a two-phased project. The first one, I'm pretty sure you're all familiar with the changes that has happened with our website. It used to be a static HTML-based website up until the end of 2013. And phase 1 of our project was to take that static HTML website and move it into a web content management system where the divisions can update their own content. During that process, there was quite a lot of enhancements done as well. And one of the biggest things that we did was we minimized the content, what we call remove the rot, redundant, obsolete, and trivial information, and try to make it as much as possible accessible in the process as well. You have to recognize that over the years, there were thousands of PDF files and all sorts of content which was not accessible at all. So it was a big endeavor to take on, and I will admit that it's not fully accessible today as well, because we're still dealing with a lot of legacy content and information that was carried over from that stage. Phase 2 of the project, though, is a completely new way of putting together Toronto.ca. And what we're looking at, it's not only the design, the web information architecture, the navigation, but we're also looking into bringing a new tool for the web content management system. The current system tool that we're using is an open text tool, but we're right now assessing WordPress and Drupal, and we're incorporating all the tool-related accessibility functions we can into this tool. So this is just a brief summary of where we were and where we're headed to. And our project timelines are by the end of 2017, we're going to have a service-oriented, citizen-centric, brand new Toronto.ca, which is going to be completely different than what we have today. So when we finish phase 2, what we aim to do is we want to create a website which is very intuitive so that things are not hidden at the bottom of a divisional content page. Very intuitive, as I said, very service-oriented and citizen-centric. And information should be findable within a couple of clicks, maximum 3 clicks. That's the whole goal. And the web information architecture and navigation is one of the key aspects making this service-oriented and citizen-centric. And the majority of the effort is going to make it findable and very usable. In doing that, what we're also paying extremely focused attention to all of the legislative requirements that we have to comply with. AODA is at the center of our goals to make it accessible. We also have to deal with privacy and other city policy and policy standards and guidelines as well. The process that we use when we're developing the new Toronto.ca is what we call a user-centered design. It's not, in a few words, what it is we don't go back to a back room and come up with a design, a navigation of what we think the public should get from us, from the city. The user-centered methodology has the user in the core of all of our building and designing and implementation. So we incorporate user testing and the citizens. When I say citizens, it is residents, businesses, visitors. We have all of these components incorporated into our building and testing and development activities. So it is not us, it is what the public wants from the Toronto.ca. The principles for the user-centered design is, first of all, understanding how the users interact with Toronto.ca. We know for a fact that lots of words, is not something that the citizens want. It has become very obvious from multiple testing activities that we want. The citizens want very actionable, right to the point accessibility to the Toronto.ca. It has to be, the methodology also is very iterative and agile. We develop prototypes and then we test it and then we incorporate what we have heard from the results of the testing into the designs again, and we take it back and we retest it. So it is continuously being improved from the feedback that we get from the public. The whole design is from, it's not divisional perspective, but it is a service from end to end. It incorporates all of the related, just like Amazon. It's like, I want to do this. Have you considered this? Are you looking at this as well? So it incorporates all of the service elements end to end from the beginning to the end. So it's sort of a major move from the current navigation and design that we have, which is very division-based. But I would like you to think about it as a service end-to-end might incorporate multiple divisions involvement into delivering that service. So the design and the whole aspect of the new website is going to be service-oriented. First of all, I just want to make sure that all of the accessibility needs were built into the web content management business and product requirements. We went through an extensive process in gathering requirements. There we had not only just the user requirements, but functional and non-functional requirements, over 800 actually, that was incorporated. So when we're building the new website, it's not only from the product point of view, but from the business point of view, we are making sure that we comply with all of these requirements. 17 of the functional requirements directly apply to accessibility, and we're incorporating these. Just a side note on this, as I said, from the technology side of things as well, we are looking at a new product. Today, while we're testing the two new products, which one of them is going to be the approved solution, we have incorporated more than 120 checks and balances into the content management system itself, which means that it is, the tool itself is not going to allow content to be developed or published if those checks and balances are not met. We have digital, the way we reach out to our citizens for feedback, it's through digital citizen advisors. What we did was we highly published and publicized our request to become digital citizen advisors. Today, we have more than 850 digital citizen advisors who signed up to test at every stage what we're developing in that iterative format. 63 of the digital citizen advisors self-identified as using assistive devices. And there was a personal invitation from Nicole to the committee to invite more individuals to become members of the digital citizen advisors, and as a result, 9 more individuals have signed up. And in June, we conducted a survey with the 63 individuals who identified as using assistive devices. And the goal of that survey was to get feedback on what are the best things that they know so we can incorporate it into our design and products as well. And out of the 63 individuals, 3 responded to our survey, and we are asking if you can please encourage others to work with us from now on as well.
Jill, I'm just going to ask you to wrap up your presentation. There will be opportunities for questions from our committee, so you may get to finish your presentation in a different way.
Okay, so basically the next one is beginning 2017, there is going to be full accessibility testing of the new design on the new tool. And again, here I'm asking you to please be involved. Encourage others to be involved in our testing so that we can provide you with the most accessible website that we can. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you very much. This is probably one of those opportunities for our committee to not just speak to the item as a citizen digital advisor, but also to just start to ask a lot of questions here. I know that the website has been raised as an issue, perhaps not as accessible as it should be. Questions from the floor, Wendy, and then Martin, and then Stephanie.
Hi.
Thank you for your presentation. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about the authoring process that you're envisioning for people who are adding new content to the website. So what sometimes happens is that you have met WCAG compliance standards, and but new content gets added by authors that don't know how to add things like alt text or to create accessible PDFs and to include those.
Yeah.
And so then parts of the website fall out of being accessible. Can you explain to me a little bit more about what you're considering in terms of the authoring environment to support ongoing accessible web content?
Well, actually, this is one of our biggest areas of focus right now. As I said, in the tool itself, the authoring environment, we have incorporated those checks and balances. For example, if there are no alt tags, it is not going to, even before the publishing stage, it's not even going to accept what is being authored. Just one example. But I have to admit, there is always a human factor in this. The tool can, check if there is alt tags put in place, but the quality of the alt tag is, again, it's an education, and it is training the authors on how to properly put that. That's why members of my group are working with with Nicole's group in creating the accessibility policy, and we're planning on for the content authoring groups to have educational sessions on how to use all of those. But again, the tool, as much as any tool can allow, we're putting all of those checks and balances. We also have other opportunities that we created. Education on how to create accessible PDFs, Word, and PowerPoint. It is a part of the city's education calendar and training calendar. It's available to city staff, but enforcement of that, definitely, it's guidelines and standards that we have to implement as well. And it is a part of our implementation and rollout as well. My pleasure.
You have a follow-up question, Wendy? No problems. I might come back to you then. And I'm sure that there might be a little bit of time. Martin, and then Stephanie.
Hi there. First off, kudos on using Drupal because there's lots of accessibility features built into it. So it's kind of nice to be able to use something that is fairly accessible. My question is, the CMS itself, if you have employees that have disabilities in-house, will they be able to add content independently as well?
Yes.
Okay. That's a quick yes. I'm glad about that. The other thing is I did join the web vitalization group, and the first meeting or the first invite that they had was to come in and test one of their products. When I told them that I was visually impaired or blind and I was going to bring my equipment in to do the testing, they said that the system wasn't fully accessible at this time. So that sort of threw a red flag to me. So I'm just wondering, and I saw that in your presentation that this had already been addressed in 2015. So I'm just wondering, is it fully accessible or not?
No, the current website is in a different web content management system,
Okay.
first of all. The invitation that we sent, and I know you got the letter saying that, oh, it's the prototype of what we're building is not accessible because we start with basically just PowerPoint wireframe.
It's wireframes, okay.
Exactly, and that's why I'm just, again, attracting your attention. The full accessibility testing for a clickable, actual design is going to start beginning of 2017, and that's when we're inviting all of you to join, please.
Will we have access to testing how the CMS works on the inside, like being able to author something and put it up there and stuff like that, or are you doing that in-house?
The very first thing is from the public's point of view.
Okay.
And I will check and I will get back to you on if you're going to be also testing the CMS authoring environment. I'll get back to you on that one.
Great, thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Stephanie?
I actually have 3 questions, if that's okay.
You have time.
Okay. My questions are more related to the actual how the information is communicated to the receiver. So I'm wondering what the level of language is and if you're incorporating plain language into the content?
Absolutely. Actually, we went through with every city division and accountability office to identify their public-facing services. Number 1 criteria was defining the services in plain language, not using engineering terms or division-specific terminology. Everything that you're going to see is going to be in plain language.
Awesome. That's great.
That is a very major component for us to deliver on the new Toronto.ca.
That's wonderful. I'm glad to hear that. Second question, is consideration being given to having American Sign Language versions of content or captioning on any videos that might be showing?
Okay, so the videos, as you know, they are third party. We use third party. We use YouTube. And the city's YouTube, city's own YouTube environment, it does accommodate all of those. But again, today in our current website, different divisions can put different kinds of tools which do not accommodate that. Today, I admit, we do random checks, but it is a huge website. It's grown again exponentially, so it's almost impossible to audit every single item. Whenever we catch something, we directly contact them and make sure that it doesn't happen. But for the new website, again, we're going to put checks and balances to make sure it's consistent standard in every way.
That's great, thank you. And my last question is just, are you able to tell me if anyone who has signed up as a digital citizen is deaf or hard of hearing? Are they identified?
If they're self-identified as that, yes, we could. We would know, yes.
But you don't know at this time?
At this point, I don't know. I don't want to give you wrong information. And, you know, there are only certain things because of privacy. We can ask so much information. If they have self-identified as such, we would know that for sure.
Great.
But for the future, if you're going to recruit more people to join, there is, when they register, there is a question. Please ask them to identify so that we can get, you know, we know.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Great, thank you. Joe to ask question, and then Yin.
Hi.
Hi, Joe.
Quite a challenging project, I think, in terms of
It
IT,
is.
to meet all of those accessibility criteria. Two questions. Is there anyone on your development staff who has a disability in any way, that blind or whatever? Do you have anyone on your staff with a disability?
Actually, not blind, but I do have staff, not only are passionate about accessibility, but they know they're very much involved with accessibility. And there is an individual that has partial disability, yes. And all of the QA that we do, we involve that individual, and the other two individuals who do quality assurance are also well-versed in AODA, so that whenever they're doing quality assurance, they also incorporate accessibility in their QA.
So, but practically and functionally, you're relying on the citizen advisors to give you real-world, kind of real hands-on feedback on the system?
Okay, so when we're doing the designs, although even the prototypes and wireframes, our accessibility resources provide feedback immediately on those, even before we go out testing. And for the actual testing itself, again, because it's our methodology, user-centered methodology, rather than city staff doing this testing, we would like the digital citizen advisors to provide feedback. For us, that's the ultimate way of making sure that we have incorporated everything we can.
Okay. My second question, I think Martin touched on this, the accessibility features that you're building into the website, is there a plan to incorporate all of that into the Toronto City internal websites for the benefit of employees?
The intranet?
No, intranet.
Our intranet, yes. The intranet right now, it's still in its static HTML state, and one of the reasons for that is we want to align internet and intranet, whatever tool we select, they have to align, because we have to think of sustainability and alignment between the two internet applications. So that is the next thing that we're looking into, yes. And regardless of what, just again, a side note, no matter what, the city, the content that's even today, which I admit it's not fully accessible, but there's always the facility to ask for the divisional staff to provide the information to whoever requires accessible, whichever format, accessibility format they want.
Thank you very much. Yin to ask questions, and then Terry Lynn.
Hi. Looking way down the road, so when these changes are made and people using the site, say in 2018, still finds, oh, this particular site or section of the website or this document is not accessible in whatever manner, and then we report it, we give the feedback. Are there guidelines or kind of, rules or something to require that department to make changes? And I don't mean just provide something in accessible format on request, but rather if something that's more systematic, that because of human error or oversight, is there such something in your policy, in your guidelines, that requires the division to actually comply, if it's noted that it hasn't been done due to, as I said, as you mentioned, human factors?
Absolutely. And Oops. And as you know, when under AODA, under the legislation, when a new site is put up, it has to be AODA compliant, AA, WSAG AA. So we have to make sure that the new Toronto.ca is compliant, but as you said, if there are instances where because of human error and all that, there's going to be a process where it comes to us and we rectify it immediately. Absolutely. That is a definite yes.
Thank you very much. Terry Lynn to ask questions.
I did.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I have two questions.
Sure.
One is that you mentioned that the number of people that have assistive devices that are the citizen users. I was actually wondering, like, there's a difference between like an assistive device, like a wheelchair, and then adaptive technology to use web-based screening and things. So things like Kurzweil and Dragon and stuff. And so I'm wondering how many people identified as needing like assistive like equipment to read print media.
Okay. Again, because of privacy, we cannot say, okay, identify what it is, but the survey that we sent to 63 individuals, we did ask them what kind of assistive devices they use.
Right.
And unfortunately, only like 3 people, well, actually 2. One was somebody was testing. It was JD, and all of that stuff. So it was like actually 2 responses, and they identified that they were using assistive devices because of sight, and the rest, we don't know. We had exactly the same dilemma. And that's why, again, when you're encouraging your members, when they register, if they can identify the kind of assistive device that they use, then we'll be able to cover all the aspects.
But there's 2 separate questions there, right? One is assistive devices. The other is, do you use adaptive technology, right, for computer use? Like, I think those are 2 different questions. And
Terry Lynn, can I ask you to speak into the microphone?
oh, sorry. Thank you. I'm just saying that they would be 2 different questions, right? Okay. So one would be the use of assistive devices, and the other would be the use of adaptive technology to use a computer.
Okay.
And people don't have to get into specifics for the purposes of the research.
Okay.
Hopefully that's helpful.
Okay, yeah, so this is a great suggestion. Yeah. We can change the wording on the Digital Citizen Advisor registration to identify the 2 that you have suggested. And that would give us much more exposure to the kinds of things we need to look at. Okay. Thank you.
My other question is, why do you think only 3 people responded to the survey?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. It's like it went to all 63 individuals.
Yeah.
And I mean, it wasn't like, oh, this doesn't apply to me, thank you, but only 2 individuals responded. So I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah.
Do you have any suggestion as to why that would happen?
I was more thinking, I'm wondering if it would be like, would it be helpful to send it to Nicole again and she can recirculate?
Absolutely.
Specifically the survey.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. And in the registration, we have said, the question actually is, Do you use assistive technology when using the internet, e.g. a screen reader, screen magnifier? That was how the question was posed.
Okay.
Okay, so now I have this one. But I will definitely send the survey to Nicole again to distribute, and if you can redistribute it to other communities, that would be very much appreciated, because we need support, we need your help.
Thank you, Jill. Terry Lynn, are you finished with your questions?
I just wanted to say, just maybe as an example, like, so I'm a wheelchair user.
Yes.
I also have dyslexia, so I don't use anything, but like in theory, I could use WordQ and that helps some people.
Okay.
So like, me saying I have assistive devices might identify me as a person with a disability, but me saying that I use like adaptive equipment is targeting a specific group of people that need access to that service.
Okay, point taken, so we can revise that for sure. Thank you.
Good suggestion. And Wendy for follow-up.
Thank you. I had to think about my follow-up. So thank you for giving me the details in terms of the authoring environment. And I think it's great that you're working in checks and balances in terms of you can't publish this unless you have met these minimum of accessibility criteria. But you raised a really interesting point, I think, in your response, too, which is that you can build that system and you can make it checks and balance focused, but you cannot speak to the quality of the accessibility additions that are being offered by people and that are required by the system. So I wondered if you could just speak a little bit, and I don't know if this is outside of what you're doing, because it might actually just extend to authors within the city environment, but who does take responsibility for making sure that that content is adequate? So it's not helpful to have an alt text that doesn't provide you with the information that the alt text is intended to provide. So is there something being envisioned in terms of this process or outside of this process that would, I know that you're offering training, so that's one piece of it, but is there an audit at some point or ongoing audits to be able to evaluate the quality of the accessibility, of the web accessibility additions that you're requiring in your authoring tool?
I'm sort of looking at Nicole right now because the corporate accessibility policy, I'm wondering if there are elements for audit and all of that. Again, we can check from the web perspective, we can check the quality, and there are certain tools, again, to make sure, and we're definitely looking into those, the corporate website audit tools and all of that, definitely looking into those. But it's a governance issue as well, where we routinely do quality checks on the content and accessibility aspects of it, which is built into the sustainment and operations of the website. And that is something that we are definitely, we have to put that as a part of the governance and content governance, that's what we call it. And it's definitely going to be there. But today, I don't know how we're going to do it because, again, it's huge. Our website is huge. And, I don't know how many people can on a regular basis do the audits. So the process of how we're going to do that audit is something that needs to be discussed and confirmed. I know it's never going to be 100%. We all know that. But with all of these, individuals responding to us saying, there is an issue here, that's one way of the public doing a check and audit as well. So it's we all have to work together on it.
Good. Great. Thank you very much. If there are no further questions, are there any comments or statements that the members would like to make? No? Okay, Wendy, please.
I'm really interested in this area, so sorry to keep coming back to it. I just wanted to say, I noticed in your testing protocol, so you've talked about digital citizens, and that's very clearly an important piece of this. You're also talking about user testing. I used to do user testing for accessible websites too, so that is a critical piece as well. I'm really pleased to see that there, and that if you actually have people come in and sit down and you can watch them and sort of use that protocol, it's very helpful, because there can be differences between accessibility and usability as well, which can be quite difficult. You have to make very informed decisions about what direction you're going to go. I just wanted to say also, and I didn't see it in your list, but it is worthwhile to also have a paid accessibility audit. So there are a number of places that you can go to do that. I know that the city has partnered with the Inclusive Design Resource Center at OCAD. They have a Web Savvy service, which does a great job too. The CNIB does a great job, but you also get another level of feedback and kind of a more formal and separate from your internal processes evaluation, which is important. Which is important in evaluation. You want to have like a little bit of arm's length too. So I would just suggest that. Okay, I would suggest it as a good step.
The user testing is definitely, again, looking around here, and we need the digital citizen advisors who have self-identified to be a part of the user testing for sure.
Thank you, Jill. Are there any other statements from, yes, Yin, is that your hand going up? Okay.
Just a quick comment, reaching out to service organizations for the blind, of course, the standard CNIB, balance for blind adults, and of course, my organization. Sometimes if we just rely on individuals, like I know Nicole sent an email to us, but sometimes we as individuals may not be able to do as much, but yeah, reach out to those organizations, especially if you're looking for people using, who are blind or partially sighted.
Okay.
Thanks.
Just one last comment. If you have any suggestions, please contact Nicole. I'm more than happy to incorporate any organization, and we will reach out to them. No problem. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And can I get a motion to receive the report and information? Thank you very much, Martin. Okay, so our next item is actually a presentation from Nicole. She's going to be speaking about accessibility in Toronto Public Service. I know Nicole's presentation is going to be condensed. Nicole, does 12 minutes, is that enough?
Do my best.
Yeah, okay. Well, this committee will be asking you questions, so.
Thanks very much, everybody, for giving me the opportunity to present to you today. As you know, I've been with the city for just over a year now, and it's been a really exciting time getting to learn what all the divisions are working on. So my first slide in this presentation is an accessibility framework. It's a table. The table is meant to represent the different levels of hierarchy of our governance model. So on this page, we've got a title, Accessibility Framework, and the chart illustrates the organizational drivers of accessibility within the Toronto Public Service. Across the top is the City Council's Statement of Commitment to Building an Accessible City. The next row across is the Corporate Accessibility Policy. This is a proposed document that's currently in development that will unify all policies that address AODA requirements and city accessibility commitments in one umbrella policy. The next row is the city's multi-year accessibility plan, and that's the city's implementation plan with timelines and strategy to prevent and remove barriers and meet our requirements under the legislation. Across the bottom of this chart are guidelines. Some are in place, some are being updated, and some need to be developed in collaboration with divisional stakeholders. And the guidelines will provide instruction and specifications on the details of how the city's commitment and plans will be realized. So across the row, there is customer service guidelines, purchasing guidelines, information and communication guidelines, employment and accommodation guidelines, complete streets, taxi bylaws, and ferry guidelines, as well as the Toronto Accessibility Design Guidelines. Other proposed resources will include, I believe what's necessary is an accessible meetings and events guideline, and other resources will definitely be developed as needs become identified. So let's talking about the corporate accessibility policy. Previously, the city being as large as it is, with over 30,000 employees and 44 divisions, how things are often run was more decentralized. So for example, a procurement division, procurement and materials management division would handle the procurement requirements of the AODA. But that's just one example that if those are all splintered and broken up over multiple different divisions, it doesn't provide for the opportunity for people to get cross-pollination, to learn about the whole scope so that all of these standards can work together to create a change in society. Individually, they don't have the same influence as they do together. So the city has many accessibility policies, and they do address the requirements of the AODA and the city's commitment to accessibility. The purpose of this corporate accessibility policy is to unite them all in one place. It will simplify and improve awareness and understanding of all parts of the legislation and help facilitate implementation and integration of accessibility as part of the way the city operates in everything that we do. The city is required to update our accessible customer service policies. They now exist in every division. So if you can imagine each division having their own policy, that's a lot of work. When the requirements of the legislation are consistent across the board, what we'll have instead is divisional procedures or guidelines of how divisions will handle the different ways that they deliver service to individuals. So for example, if you're in the water division, you may have dramatically different requirements than in Parks, Forestry, and Recreation. So because we're required, as you know, there was changes to the legislation in the accessible customer service area. So this brought forth the requirement that we have to update our policies and update our training. And so when we incorporate that into the city's accessibility policy, that will cover two objectives. And the policy requirements will be supported by the accessibility guidelines that we'll discuss again in a later slide. And we'll be bringing the policy ideally to a working group of the Disability Committee, of the Disability Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee, so that we can get feedback on the policy. The multi-year accessibility plan is our next slide. The current plan, you've probably looked at it online. It's from covering the period from 2012 to 2016. And you probably have noticed that the current plan is very focused on AODA compliance because through the period of 2012 to 2016, there were various deadlines and requirements that had to be met. The updated plan will be making the recommendation to the organization that it run from 2017 to 2025. As you know, we have to develop and update the plan every 5 years, but we want to make sure that we're taking into consideration all of the things that we need to do to meet the goal of making an accessible society by 2025. And so what we'll do is at the 5-year interim, we'll review and update. The focus will be, for the future plan, will be about moving beyond basic compliance. As you know, a lot of the legislation right now talks about, for example, providing accommodation upon request, providing information and communication upon request. For an organization of this size, that's not enough, it's not sustainable over the long term. So obviously we want to transform to an organization that is incorporating accessibility in everything that we do, everything that we create, everything that we buy. That will take a lot of work. You know, unfortunately, as many of you who use assistive technology are already aware, document accessibility, there's a lot of people using Microsoft Word that are using it like a typewriter. And so we have to, it will help improve people's skills overall, as well as incorporating accessibility. I can't tell how many times I've trained people on accessible Word documents, for example, where they're so delighted because they've learned all kinds of shortcuts that make their life better for all of their document authoring needs. So as I mentioned, we're moving beyond this. The focus will be on barrier identification because we need to know what we need to fix. Remediation planning and preventing new barriers by integrating accessibility into operations. So we know that we've got two main streams of the approaches that we can take for preventing and removing barriers. The city's goal, as I mentioned, is to align with the province's goal for 2025. And so we'll be looking at the two means. One, integrating accessibility into new programs, services, and facilities from the earliest phases and throughout, including the planning and procurement stages, implementation, measurement, and evaluation. And then bringing that information back in and updating things if things are not as good as they can be yet. We also have to identify and remediate barriers in the existing environment, and that means all barriers, not just physical barriers. So we're talking about attitudinal barriers that get addressed through awareness, education, and training. We're talking about systemic barriers through our plans and policies and our procedures, and there's an equity lens that's been developed by Equity, Diversity, and Human Rights Division that will help to bring that accessibility lens along with the other equity-seeking groups and the needs of others as well. Talking about information and communication barriers being print, audio, video, digital, and web, which we just heard about, as well as verbal. Accessible built environments includes buildings and public spaces. So in all of those areas, we need to first identify and plan for this remediation, because as we know, if you don't plan for it, you're not going to get it accomplished. The accessibility guidelines I highlighted in an earlier slide, so they include accessible customer service guidelines, and there's an enormous undertaking taking place in the city right now under a customer service improvement strategy. So we would expect to align with that as well, so that accessibility is a priority in that work as well. Accessible procurement guidelines, information and communication guidelines, accessible workplace guidelines. We have many of these things in place already. Some things, for example, accessible meetings and event guidelines do exist on the intranet, but I've found that they're not very easy to use. So we want to make things that are user-friendly and just as easy to find. Complete Streets guidelines. I know that you've all, through the Disability Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee, whether it was in 2015 or in this new group, we've heard from different groups on complete streets, on bicycles. So I think we heard about the many different presentations from transportation services. Sorry, time for a little sip of water. Taxi bylaws were updated recently. Ferry guidelines, which follow the AODA as well as federal requirements, and the Toronto Accessibility Design Guidelines that are currently in development for an updated version. So given the number of guidelines that were planned for update or development, I was recommending this as a working group on education and awareness to consult and provide feedback. What I've found through all of my time in the first year, we have staff that have a really strong desire to support accessibility. They're asking for tools and resources. Just in the last month alone, I've consulted on 2 major software procurement initiatives where they're and these are major software procurement initiatives that the public will have an interface with as well. So they're looking at, how do we incorporate accessibility in our procurement, in our ask of vendors? How do we hold vendors accountable? How do we test throughout? So these are all things that people are hungry for, and the guidelines will help support that, as well as training. So speaking of training, and I don't know if I have this, looks like my slides are not in the same order. Maybe I got a little carried away. So I want to work this year on capturing hearts and minds as well. I think it's just not enough to have policies, and the training that we've been providing does meet the legislation, but we need to move beyond that so that the training has meaning, so that it's strongly connected to the work that people do. There are opportunities to highlight these things, but I think they've been extremely underutilized, and I've studied what's been done in many other municipalities, and seeing on the screen right now some of the opportunities that we would like to make sure that we are using, both for the public awareness and also for employee awareness, such as the National Access and Awareness Week, the UN Persons with Disabilities Day, our Toronto Access and Equity and Human Rights Awards, opportunities such as the Invictus Games, which is a public event, and also through the Toronto Public Service staff, developing what I'm calling an accessibility champions network. I found that there are people in every division that are working on accessibility, but they don't know each other. So we want to try and create that momentum and support. The purpose of the working groups that I see as one of our next discussion items on the agenda is to explore the subject matter more thoroughly. So there are a lot of opportunities, such as the Toronto Accessibility Design Guidelines, and I expect that we'll probably be seeing a presentation and an update from them in October. But given that it's a 400-page document, that's not sufficient time to get everybody's feedback. So these are some of the things that I see as an opportunity for the working group that was proposed on built environment and public spaces. The working groups provide a fulsome opportunity to give input that can be accomplished, more can be accomplished that way than in the Disability Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee formal meetings. It also gives us the opportunity to bring in staff when appropriate to review materials that are at their very early stages when they're not ready for public consumption. And it gives us the opportunity to collaborate on outreach opportunities. When we have new issues that are of the concern to the group, as Chair mentioned at the beginning of our meeting, we want to make sure that those come before the entire committee so that they can be raised, discussed, and then assigned to an appropriate working group. So the working group recommendations, I see this committee as an extremely strong component of an important component of the whole accessibility approach for the city. I would love to be able to bring your presence more in front of other groups. So when we do, if there's opportunities like webinars or public events, we may not have, everybody may not have the same ability or the time frames available to donate their time in addition to this committee, but that's something that we'll work through. So the recommendations that we put forward were education and awareness, built environment and public spaces, and creating third ad hoc working groups as required. And the recommendation was to review the groups biannually to evaluate the topics and areas in membership. We've got a pretty strong vision of how we see things going to kick off the 2017 with all of these guidelines and resources and development. So perhaps by 2018 we may need to revisit and see if working groups need to change. But I believe that one of the most frequent questions that the Disability Committee members pose to presenters is about training. It is about education. So these are one of the things that I consider to be a key strategy for the city to improve the accessibility outcomes, and we want to get your feedback on all of those as they're being developed. Timing is crucial as well, so a lot of the times there's gaps between our official meetings, so that's a way to consider or to continue furthering things when divisions need feedback on stuff rather than waiting sometimes 30, 60, or 90 days to get in front of a committee meeting. There may be opportunities to give them feedback on work that they're developing while it's in iterative stages rather than waiting till it gets to the end. The built environment and public spaces crosses into every aspect of city life, and it's a massive undertaking to update the Toronto Accessibility Design Guidelines. Additionally, there are needs to comply with what the AODA requirements has for this committee, and under the AODA, this committee, and ideally in the future, it would be, I think, beneficial for the residents of the city to have a committee that's named after what the legislation says, because in the AODA, the legislation calls this committee an Accessibility Advisory Committee. So it's kind of a barrier for people to be able to find us and find the work that your committee is doing when we have a name that is so long and confusing. So that's something for another day, but I believe that it's very important that we remember that we're a committee that's required by the legislation to look at things like buildings and site plans, to look at things like trails or parks or public eating spaces. These are opportunities that are already being addressed by divisional working groups, but in order to make sure that we're also complying with the legislation, we have to have these, or it's recommended anyhow, that these processes be in place. So I've ended my presentation on where things are with the city, and I'm looking forward to questions and comments.
Great. right, thank you very much, Nicole. I think that was a great presentation. You got a lot in there in about 16 and a half minutes.
Thank you for allowing me for
No,
this.
it was really good, and it was actually important. Questions from the committee, please? Everyone is satisfied, except for Stephanie.
Never
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Okay, just around the training, who's developing and providing the training? Are persons with disabilities involved in the initial development of the training modules?
The training modules that are currently available are ones that were developed by the province, and they meet the requirements of the AODA. Other training, there are many times that divisions take on their own training, and so I would like to connect with those divisions. Often they reach out to us for feedback on their training. There are other training modules that have been developed in the past on implementing the AODA, and in my view, those ones were very legislative-oriented, but when people, as feedback from that previous trainer, when I met with her, was explaining to me that a lot of the people come asking to understand better how to accommodate people, and there's clearly a need to have a deeper understanding of general information about disabilities and what types of accessibility, or what makes things accessible for different people with different disabilities, and what type of accommodations are typically used. And people need to have a foundational knowledge in order to be able to implement the legislation in their work. So yes, we will be including people with disabilities to give feedback in content that's being developed by the Equity, Diversity, and Human Rights Office. And you know, I think that the other training that is going forward is something that it needs to be still developed. Like, there are certain divisions, for example, the Transportation Division has done a robust training for their individuals, but I think that we have other opportunities that there are people in perhaps Toronto Building or Urban Design. We just want to create a little bit more momentum, right? Because the training that's been done is good, but I don't think everybody's aware of it. It also becomes challenging budget-wise. So in my heart of hearts, and this is going way beyond 2017, I believe, but I would like to see more of a train-the-trainer approach, where divisions can have this knowledge within their managers. I think that there's a danger in too much reliance on external consultants to deliver training, and although the city is massive, so oftentimes we have to rely on third-party support. But I think that there's a balance between that, because otherwise you're missing an opportunity for those managers who are leaders in this area to be able to internalize that in more intensive training programs, and be able to then disseminate more effectively and make better decisions.
Thank you, Stephanie. Victoria.
I have kind of a theory question for you. So when you're developing this training and looking at it, are you going to, I've been thinking about this for a few minutes and I'm still trying to figure it out, sorry. Are you going to look at, for maybe going over with people, kind of the theories of behind disability and its causes, like kind of the medicalized individual model versus social model? Because the problems I keep running into lately are that when I'm trying to discuss accessibility and disability, we're coming at it from completely different angles. So when I find once I have that discussion with people, it makes it a lot easier, and then they kind of understand it better, but so often we skip that conversation, and I think it's a really important one to have.
Mm-hmm. And I think that you've expressed very well what I was trying to explain earlier about giving people a better foundation in understanding individuals with disabilities, because a lot of the time, if you're not somebody who has a friend or a family member or lived experience yourself, then you may not be aware of the full range of people's abilities, and you might make assumptions for people based on what you think somebody's, instead of recognizing a person's human rights, to have individualized, independent, dignified access that is not a cookie cutter, that the consultation aspect is crucial. So I think that that's another reason why I believe a working group on education and outreach is an excellent opportunity to make sure that we're getting those things in there and vetting them with people with disabilities to identify if they feel anything's missing.
Great, thank you. Wendy?
Thank you for a great presentation.
Thank you.
Very interesting, and it really helps to kind of contextualize all of the various bits that I think we're all sort of aware of, but maybe haven't seen in the same place before, so thank you for that. I really like the hearts and minds, that you're thinking about hearts and minds. So aside from the guidelines, that this is something that is important. And I like the opportunities that you have listed there. And I'm wondering, you know, this year's International Day for Persons with Disabilities, is there anything that you're thinking about for this year? Is there any way for the committee to support you in that? And I'm saying that one in particular because every year I look to see what the City of Toronto is doing, and typically it's nothing. So is there something that this committee could support you in terms of that happening? And I'm asking now because I know we need a few months.
Yes, definitely, and I'm looking forward to you know, having the opportunity to discuss if we have a working group that we can get more involved. I will tell you a little bit of the history, and it's pretty sketchy for me because I wasn't here prior to a year ago, but it's my understanding that that many years ago the city did lead some activities in regards to the United Nations Persons with Disabilities Day in December, and that a community group, whether they volunteered or how it came to be, that a community group had more or less taken it over. And I think that there's sort of some lost history there, and I think we just need to envision the future that we want and build that rather than worrying too much about what did or didn't happen in the past. It's a huge opportunity. It also coincides very a timely way with our human rights awards too. So you know, we need to use those opportunities to their greatest effect.
Thank you very much. Yes, you have time.
Follow up. So so it's coming through the working group, I think is what you're proposing, through the education working group? Okay, so we will have an opportunity to talk to you in more detail about that through that work.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Karma?
I was just wondering also how are city councilors, for example, are they also going to be receiving training? And what about management?
Yes, definitely. It's an area where I've heard from different members of the public and other accessibility advocates that have highlighted to me that there is inconsistent understanding, that not all counselors have the same level of understanding of what the AODA requirements are. And even with the best of intentions, sometimes they've accidentally booked venues for public meetings that aren't accessible and things like that. So I know that there's a definite will there, and providing them with the guidance is truly the counselors get so many inquiries from the public. And oftentimes they come to our division to ask for help. And so the three things that I see most often coming from council offices is public meetings and events, also people inquiring about accessibility barriers in private facilities and asking for their counselors to help influence. So helping them have a better understanding of the legislated requirements, the requirements of private businesses to respond to the point of undue hardship as required by the Human Rights Code. The other area that they get a lot of feedback on is service animals. So we want to create materials and resources that the counselors can easily make sure that their staff are well informed when their staff are receiving feedback from people, and also knowing how to share this information with members of the public too, and businesses that are such a huge component of accessibility in the city.
Great, thank you very much. Terry Lynn to ask questions.
Oh, questions? Okay.
Yes,
No.
we're still at the questions.
Okay.
Stephanie to ask questions.
Sure. And I also want to acknowledge this is fabulous, and I can see the amount of work. It's very complex and detailed, and there's a lot to be done. My question is regarding any kind of governing body within the city. And this is my ignorance because I'm not sure how the system works, but what's in place to ensure that policies and procedures actually make their way into practices? I think it's really great that staff are coming forward and are begging for the information. That's wonderful. I applaud their intent. There are others who do not have that same kind of passion or even knowledge. So is there something in place, or is it within each division to govern that?
There are management infrastructure in place within the city through different divisional clusters of divisions, as well as different working groups. So for example, there's interdivisional staff teams on access and equity, but there's also management like division heads and opportunities to communicate through division head meetings as well, so that they have a sound understanding and understand their responsibility in providing so that is going to be obviously part of the corporate accessibility policy, is the roles and responsibilities, so that each part of the organization, whether they be directors of divisions or managers of work groups or frontline staff, so that each part of the organization understands their responsibility to facilitate the policy and the procedures.
Any other questions? I have a question then. Nicole, the presentation is excellent, and I recognize that the volume of work that your office, and more specifically you are tasked with, is rather limited, and system changes don't happen overnight. And especially system changes with respect to people's attitudes and physical removal of barriers and what have you. Do you have the resources, the staff, in order for you to achieve this goal?
I think that everybody in the city, every division in the city would wish that we could have more resources, and if budget was provided, then I would certainly make excellent use of it. However, that being said, we have accessibility experts in almost every division that are part of helping us implement this. So you've met a number of them as they've come forward and give presentations. So for example, in the web revitalization team, I interact on a regular basis with staff on Jill's team, both within the city and in information in the community, in interest groups on web accessibility. So they're out there, they're very involved. Transportation Services Division have accessibility experts that implement the guidelines and requirements. In procurement, there's a key person who's responsible for giving guidance. So I'll be working with that person to develop the guidelines. So I don't see myself as working alone in this in any stretch. We've got support in strategic communications. We've got support, like literally in every division, there are key people that are tasked with accessibility requirements. My vision for the future is that as people learn how they contribute to the overall system, that it will become internalized knowledge with even more individuals that contribute to the outcomes. All the accessibility consultants that I know say, our goal is to work ourselves out of a job, so that, at some point in time by 2025 or possibly sometime around that, there may not be as much of a need for an accessibility consultant, because just like thinking about other areas in, green technology and environmentally friendly actions, you don't have one person making sure that everybody recycles, right? So that is the goal of what I would like to see, that accessibility becomes as top of mind in everything we do, just like it is when we think of senior strategy or youth strategy or newcomer strategy, that accessibility has an equally important mind share.
How often do the consultants meet, the accessibility advisors to every division?
There's quarterly meetings.
And then at those quarterly meetings, is there a milestone achieve section, such as we're on track, or this is an area that requires more resources, more time? And are there weak divisions? Are there divisions that you have flagged? Because I can't imagine all of them performing at the same capacity, reaching the same level of understanding. Are there divisions that are weaker than others?
I think that what you've identified is what I see as an opportunity. They are reporting and giving feedback on their progress, but I think that historically these projects and things that are being worked on across the divisions have not been documented effectively. So if we're not documenting our plans, then it's very difficult to have systematic follow-up to see how people are with achieving their goals by the timelines they were working toward. So I see that as part of the accessibility plan. I think the format of our multi-year accessibility plan will be a little more detailed so that we can capture the things that are being worked on.
And then my final question is with respect to the training that needs to take place in order for our staff, the Toronto Public Service, to be able to deliver the service, have a better understanding of client sensibilities. How is that being resourced if we're talking at a policy implementation level and then the basic compliance, but the next phase is actually probably the phase that's the most important is now culture shift.
Mm-hmm.
How are you resourced to do that culture shift?
Well, as you know, the budget planning for the city takes a very, very long time frame. So I think that at this point in time, we'd be asking for additional budget, I believe, for 2018. But again, as I said, I don't know that there are certain things that require, a training lab to do accessible document training. But there are also ways to create webinars. I don't think that we're fully making use of the various different types of training and outreach opportunities to create lunch and learns for people or to create webinars. For example, the training that's being offered right now on accessible document creation is a full course starting from from scratch to creating an accessible document. I believe that the city has to have a more robust document accessibility approach that starts with existing templates, because the way that the training is being offered is kind of like, here's how you create a template. Well, we don't want to have 50 different, it may be 15,000 different versions of what somebody interpreted as accessible. We want to create the basic foundation so that a 1-hour webinar can provide people with the information that they need to understand how to use the features in a Word document to create accessibility in a basic way. While different levels of users will require a much more intensive, maybe even 1 or 2 day training on how to use Adobe InDesign to create accessible, more complex documents that will be things that exist on the web at one point in time. So we need to look at a hierarchy of how people get trained that's appropriate to the role of their job.
Thank you. Are there any speakers to the item? Yin, please.
I want to reinforce the point made earlier about having people with the lived experience, people with disabilities, and those who really require a lot of accommodations and using assistive devices to be part of the training. Whether it's a webinar, an in-person, or even the development stage, because oftentimes consultants are hired, which you mentioned, and they are expensive, and most of them I see that they are not really representative of our community. They're people who are passionate about the cause, but again, there's nothing that substitutes someone with a lived experience. So I would strongly encourage you in your capacity of influence that whatever training happens, bring in someone that lived experience so that they can speak to the audience, speak to the managers, speak to the counselors, speak to people who actually develop all the documents, like you said, and any other designs that affect our community, even if it's for an hour, even if it's for part of the training, because without us being present, the message is diluted or misrepresented. So I strongly want to point that out again.
Okay, thank you, Yin. Anyone else to speak? I'll also need a motion to receive at some point. Terry Lynn?
Thank you for the presentation. It has some additional information in it, which was useful for me. I just wanted to say that the working groups, again, I feel like they're too, there's a lot of things that this committee was working on, can work on, that doesn't necessarily fit into these two working groups. For example, it was brought to our attention, not by the committee as a whole, but from someone in the community about employment and city standards and things like that. And a lot of the things that even Nicole, you talked about today, you said that city staff often come to you about requests around accommodation, right? And what Yin is speaking to specifically, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Yin, but you're speaking about, right? We're not the paid consultants or the people that are called on as experts, and then other folks that are speaking for us are called in. And I guess this isn't a surprise to the committee. I recognize that this is an equity, diversity, and human rights document, and when we called on equity, diversity, and human rights to speak about employment for people with disabilities, we often got comments for months about, we're working on it, we're working on it, we're working on it. And then at the last meeting, there was a comment about, there was a youth program for youth with disabilities specifically, and only 2 youth with disabilities were employed at the end of the day. So I feel like, I guess what I'm saying is, there are some very important issues and concerns that are not mentioned in this presentation. The other one would be access to the TTC. And we did have a housing committee as well that I feel is fairly pertinent. And I know I said it before. I have an idea. I'm not proposing that it's even a good idea, but it's in my mind because I'm wondering about why these working groups have to come from diversity, access, inclusion in particular, and why it can't come from the committee. And I guess one idea, again, I'm not saying it's a good idea, but I'm just wondering if a lot of the working groups that we form could be ad hoc groups based on the issues that come to the committee.
Actually, our next item is going to specifically deal with the working groups.
Okay.
And I think in order for us to keep the housekeeping nice and tidy here,
Okay.
If you want to just warehouse exactly what you've said, and we're going to bring that back up in the next discussion, and then we can actually have the back and forth. Is that all right?
Okay.
Okay. But I think your point has been well stated. Karma, to speak.
Well, I was just going to comment again on pretty much what Ian and Terry Lynn said there. We can make the whole system, the whole city accessible and everything by 2025, right? But at the end of the day, it'll be wonderful and all that, but to me, in my personal opinion, is at the end of the day, it'll be meaningless if you don't include people with disabilities, right? So as citizens of the city, we need to have the same rights and opportunities as an able-bodied individual. At my workplace, they're finally starting to look into training managers about hiring people with disabilities, because they have come to the realization that we don't do enough of that, right? And so I'm thinking, as part of this revitalization and making everything accessible, is to do more on the employment side. And I do understand, that, you can't hire every single person with a disability, but with the number of people who are disabled and our unemployment rate, it's just absolutely shocking. And also the other point is that, when you're looking at the stats within the city, and you're looking at the number of people that they say have disabilities, and then you're looking at age, you know exactly who are the disabled ones, right? And you know that most of these people with disabilities are going to be gone in a couple of years because they're going to be retiring, right? So the city needs to look at doing more in hiring, whether it is setting up some sort of special project or whatever. And I know these things can be done because they've been done in the past, right? So, yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Karma. Anyone else to speak? No? Okay. So I'll just make a quick comment and also move to receive the staff presentation. Thank you, Nicole, for your ongoing work. I think that you have a very large job. I'm happy to hear that there are people that are supporting the work. I am nervous, knowing the way our budget sometimes works at City Council, that perhaps things will fall off or perhaps not even make it into the draft. And I think that what is going to be required is a communication, public awareness, almost a political campaign from our working group in order for us to give the proposal that will be coming forth for more resources, a little bit of jet fuel to make sure that it does take off and actually get some attention, which is exactly what this committee is tasked for, I think, in some ways. Provide information, provide feedback to our public service, but also to advocate for the things that we are looking for. So I think, my comment to you, Nicole, and to those that you're working with is don't hesitate to lean on us. I think you've got a group of individuals here who are energized. We want to make sure that there is system change, and if the system change doesn't happen, then I think, not only have you not done an effective job, we have not have done an effective job. So we're in this one together. Okay, thank you very much. Motion to receive is on the floor. All in favor? Okay, so adopted. Thank you very much. And we're moving to item number 4, which is our last item. Now we get to talk about the working groups.
Would you like me to stay here so I can answer any
You know what,
questions?
if you're comfortable there, I think that's perfectly fine, because you're going to be on our hot seat anyways. So, are there any questions about the staff report that's before us around the recommendations for the working group? I know, Terry Lynn, you want to resurrect that comment/question?
It's okay. I think it was received, right? People still remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Martin.
Being the geek that I am, I'm just wondering why there was not a technology committee or subcommittee, whatever, working group, sorry, considered, and if there isn't, which working group would it fall under?
Thank you, through the chair. I will answer your question. There's the primary work that's being done right now is the web revitalization work. I believe that what I see as the long-term strategy, we have an accessibility policy to launch first off. We have to create the information and communication guidelines that partly exist but are splintered and need to be tightened up. Once those accessibility guidelines are in place, and probably concurrently at that time, I would like to be implementing an overall document accessibility or information and communication accessibility strategy for the city. This is a fairly complex undertaking that our chief information people haven't been fully apprised of my future vision. However, we do need an approach that addresses transactional documents such as invoices that are on water, for example. How are our bills being created and how are they being provided in an accessible format? Well, currently, we respond and provide those accessible formats upon request, but that costs us money. A third-party service provider undoubtedly is participating in that through our vendor and then sending them to the client. These are things that can be developed through the long-term technology strategy that the city has. There's many different works being undergoing work right now, such as electronic document records management strategies and things like that. So we need to align our accessibility plan, and that will be part of the working through with each division and building our long-term accessibility plan so that they understand that they need to work towards a future state when things are accessible right from the outset, that we're not providing documents upon request, that when somebody has an accessibility need, that they get the document in the format, and the documents are all, because we never know when somebody's going to develop a disability. We have to be able to provide the invoices to anybody who may require it in an alternate format. As the population ages, how many alternate formats do we want to be creating? Every individual document? Certainly not. So that's one aspect of it. And then the document strategy, of course, or technology being from a point of view of the content that gets out on the web that represents us to the public, but also the critical aspect of how we create documents so that when we're hiring people with disabilities, they don't come into an environment full of accessibility barriers and information communication. So I think that it may be an ad hoc working group, or it may be something that we do a technology-related working group when the timing is appropriate as things move along with our strategy.
Okay. The other aspect as well is not only digital accessibility, but there's also hardware accessibility, and for example, like traffic lights and stuff like that. So we'd have to, I guess, have an ad hoc for that as well. There's new technology coming out all the time, and I know that the traffic lights, the audible traffic lights that we are using now are fairly expensive, and there's other options out there that are cheaper. But anyways, I mean...
So if I could respond to that.
Sure.
I do see that as part of the transportation services. Our transportation services also works on the accessible pedestrian crossings and things like that. So that would be an item that would be well addressed under built environment and public spaces. And of course, being part of the procurement strategy, right? I think the city has an incredible opportunity to create a ripple effect throughout society in everything that we purchase, whether we're hiring a consultant and the report has to be accessible, or whether we're procuring a new building or a new facility or new equipment. So hardware purchases I would see as part of our procurement requirements. So there may be an education and training aspect to make sure that people understand their responsibilities and how to ask for accessibility. But there's also the physical aspect of how those things perform, and that would be built environment and public spaces.
Okay, my last question then is, in your procurement documents, is there reference to AODA and accessibility and all that fun stuff, or?
Yes, there is, but at the current state, the way that the resources are aligned requires too much for the individual who's undertaking the procurement to know about the whole landscape of what makes a product accessible. So I've been doing some pretty intensive consultations on some procurement opportunities, and I want to standardize those guides and resources.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
My question or my comment is related to the kind of removing of the information and communication group and putting it under education and awareness. I'm concerned that there's an aspect of accessibility that will get lost. Built environment is one thing where you've got actual concrete things that are being looked at. Communication is a key piece that doesn't fit under built environment, but to put it under education and awareness, I'm concerned that it's sort of going to get lost in a number of other things. So what I'm talking about are things, not just things like ASL, interpreting or captioning for hard of hearing, but also for other levels of disability, language, understanding how to communicate with persons who have developmental delay and that sort of thing. And it's more than just educating and and giving people awareness. I don't know how to formulate what I'm saying, but I'm afraid that it's going to get lost amongst other issues, or just assumed that we'll roll it up into developing it into training modules as opposed to actually it becoming something concrete that is named and outlined. So I don't know if you want to speak to that or.
Sure, thank you. I believe at this point in time, and that's why I would recommending to revisit the working groups. Certainly, if something comes before the committee, for example, and there isn't a working group and it needs to be developed to have a team of people to address something specifically, and I don't know what it is yet because we haven't crossed that bridge, but at this point in time, I feel that the first goal should be making sure that we have those guidelines, that we are educating people on how to make information and communication accessible. And if we do find that there are gaps, then I want to make sure that we address those gaps. But right now, it seems the most glaring gap is the resources that people need in order to understand. So if in the future, for example, we're doing something more along the lines of a strategy for making all information and communication accessible so that we can create things at the outset that's accessible and not fixing it, at the end of the process or when somebody asks for it. But I'm not sure if, I hesitate because I did do a lot of research as well on the many different working groups that existed previously, and they didn't seem to have a direct connection to something that was being created, so we don't want to sit around and just complain about something. If there's something that is a genuine concern, it needs to come to the full committee to be explored. And we have to have this open meeting dialogue, and then if we find that either of the two working groups are insufficient, then we should create another group to focus on that.
I agree, it's a little bit vague and unclear, but if I can just give you an example. So if you're talking about built environment, there are certain standards that you're looking at and implementing. When it comes to the communication, I also see that there should be certain standards in place, and I don't know how that gets established and communicated to people.
So at the city, we don't generally call them standards, we call them guidelines. For example, we have the Toronto Accessibility Design Guidelines, but those ones have very specific measurements and requirements of what makes a physical space accessible or what makes signage accessible, or so when we're thinking about what the information and communications guidelines will look like, it should reflect that people are able to look at these guidelines and say, okay, this doesn't cut it. This is not adequate. For example, that videos have to have captioning, and the captioning has to meet certain qualities, right? We can't just use a YouTube captions. We have to actually make sure it's being properly authored so that we don't have wrong words and weird things being said in the captions that aren't being said in the actual video.
Terry Lynn to ask questions.
Oh. I kind of wanted to address a comment, but if I need to do that later, then I will.
So you were saying you would like to speak to it afterwards?
Yes.
Okay, so hang tight.
Okay.
Any other questions? Wendy? And then Yin.
I'm considering the working group question too. And this is my first year on the committee. So I don't know anything about the history of the working groups either. And so maybe my question is kind of a structural question. It seems to me that what you're proposing, you can clarify, are two groups that you think relate most closely to the work that the committee might be engaging in and the work that you have coming up. Is that how the committees have been decided in the past? And if not, what has been the criteria that has been used to decide committees in the past?
I am not sure that there were any criteria other than the committee wanted to talk about certain working groups. We do have some challenges, for example, that a transit working group, while at the city we do have requirements for, we have a transportation services division. However, excessively focusing on a third-party organization like the TTC is outside of the scope. The public service bylaws clearly state that the agencies of the city are separate organizations. So when we think about that one, I'm not sure some of the things that were being discussed, but it's difficult to, spend all the time on things where the TTC, for example, has, and I was a part of the advisory committee on accessible transit and their working groups on service planning and design review. So, I'm aware of the fact of how things are being supported through the TTC and was able to see all of the things coming through the committee, through the working groups, and actually resulting in changes. So one of the topics, for example, was, and as speaks to something that Karma mentioned earlier, we can make all kinds of things accessible, but it becomes a real challenge when the public becomes a part of the equation and they don't move out of the way and let people on. And one of the largest barriers in transit is other customers that get in front and get on the bus beforehand, and then there's no room for somebody to use the ramp to get on. The spaces are all closed up. So one of the priorities that was raised through the ACAT committee was to start educating the public, and that went through their communications group and resulted in public awareness campaign that included messaging on that topic. So, I think that the same type of model, we have the opportunity to do the same type of thing with our working groups here, where we're really delving into the topics, meeting with employees at the city that are working on things, that they can bring stuff before it's ready for public consumption. That's one of the opportunities that I see as to strengthen the structure of how the work gets into the committee. Ideally, when the working groups happen, they report back for a few minutes at the whole body of the Disability Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee, so that everybody can know what's being worked on and ask a few questions. If that's I think that's the model that I've seen work very effectively.
Okay, go ahead.
So just to clarify though, because I'm asking about how they were formed in the past. So do we know how the committees, was it just that it was discussed here in the room and the committee members decided to form the ad hoc groups? And is there a precedent for somebody in your position to decide what the groups are versus the committee? This is what I'm trying to understand. How does it typically work?
I think that in the past, each chair had some decisions on how they wanted to run their committee. So in different sessions of council, the committee has run quite differently. We have an opportunity to decide amongst yourselves on how you would like. My recommendations were based on the research that I did and what I saw other municipalities were achieving through their working groups. And also, as you noted, looking at the work that the city is working on to embed accessibility in everything that we do. But, your committee has the ability to decide amongst yourselves if you want to create different working groups.
Okay, great. Yin, question?
Yes, seeing that the built environment is already a standard, an AODA standard, and then education and awareness is not an existing standard, it's very different. So to your point, there's a need for a working group to make sure that the built environment is either complied with or better, stipulated or make sure it happens. So similarly, why can't there be an information and communications working group to make sure, especially in light of the website, revitalization and all that is going on, to match with the AODA standard? I mean, my other question is, so, there's a difference between the two working group names. One is built environment, which fits really nicely with AODA, but then there's the education and awareness doesn't fit there, but information and communications does. Secondly, I don't understand, please clarify, when you say education awareness, is that internally facing, that educate and raise awareness of the city staff, or educate and build awareness of the public? Because if it's towards the public, I think it's the job of the city staff to do.
I see it as both. So the goal of the Toronto Public Service is to, make sure that we're running the city in a way that that meets the needs of the residents of the city. So certainly, education and awareness is important within the staff. Their needs are priority, but of course, I think that, as I've touched on earlier, the city has a great opportunity to create this ripple effect through the city. So it may be outreach and awareness to businesses to help educate them. It may be outreach and awareness to community members. I think that we're not very effectively communicating with people with disabilities. In a society where we have all these different types of social networking and the ability to do mass communications or individualized communications. I hope to see in the future the ability to communicate with people with disabilities that are interested in knowing what the city is doing to become more accessible. I think that there's been, when I was doing my studies of reviewing everything that had been done in the past with different working groups, I went back as far as 10 and 15 years of disability. It was called the Disability Issues Committee at one point in time, and seeing all of the same names, people that I've been advocating with through TTC, people that I've been advocating with through various different accessibility working groups, and it's the same people, by and large, the same 60 or 75% of the people are supporting all kinds like Metrolinx working groups. They're supporting Toronto waterfront working groups. There's people that are supporting divisions. There's people that are supporting our elections efforts that are in working groups. And I would like to see us being able to reach more people with disabilities and having them participate in a more robust way in our consultation processes. So I don't know if that helps to answer your question.
My first part of the question, why is there, built environment is the AODA standard, and then why can't we have information? You explained it, but I'm just saying, it fits nicely if we want to really make sure information, information, education, you can loosely do it that way, but the missing piece is ensuring communications are accessible. And I know you explained it, but I'm just saying, why can't we name it that way to be consistent?
I think that the opportunity was looking at, first of all, how much can we cover? If we had a working group on every single standard that's in the AODA, then I would definitely need to ask for more resources, because who's going to run all those things? I'm looking for opportunities for cross-pollination as well. So, for example, Terry Lynn mentioned housing earlier. Well, there's two aspects to housing: making the attitudes improved, making some training and awareness so people understand the very diverse needs of potential people using either long-term care housing or shelters. But also there's the physical aspect of making long-term care housing and shelters accessible. So it seems that there are sort of two buckets of areas where we need to make improvements, and information and communication is partly a procurement, when we're buying new equipment, that it is compatible with people's assistive technologies, that it is usable by people with disabilities. Like, for example, Drupal was discussed earlier as a content management system, and Drupal has spent an incredible amount of effort to make sure that any user can add content to a website using their interface. So there's a procurement aspect of how we're purchasing things that contribute to information and communication, and then there's a training aspect of how people are learning how to do accessible document authoring. If we find that there's other gaps, then I would be thrilled to say, hey, it's not meeting our needs, we need another working group. But I think that right now, those are the groups that I felt would have the biggest impact on the work that needs to be done.
Thank you. Any other questions for Nicole? No? Nicole, I have a question around implementation. The timeline to create the two recommended working groups, when do you think we can get this up and running?
As far as the timeline, there are, I guess, two types of approaches. You know, people could put their hand up right now and say, this is the group I would like to belong to, and see how it works out. So I know that there are some people around the table that may have work commitments that may prevent them from getting involved immediately in a committee. So, you know, maybe we won't have everybody wanting to be on the same committee. In other accessibility advisory groups that I've been a member of, those have often worked from the point of view of people providing the feedback, and then having somebody select the members, whether it be the chair or somebody else. So, you know, you could email me about which working groups you would like to be on. That could be another approach. Or it could be something where people, you know, vote on it next. But I would rather see, I mean, we're at the beginning of September and we're not meeting again until the end of October. So I would much rather see that, that either we could decide on who is interested in which working groups. First of all, the decision of whether the working groups are acceptable is something that you may wish to vote on. And then once you've decided if those working group titles are appropriate, if you would like to either, you know, do by a show of hands or do after, you know, by email.
Okay, so I'm going to interpret that as perhaps within the next 2 months we'll have the working group established. I just am trying to understand the timeline. If we do not have enough DAAC members, and each working group will be comprised of up to 4 DAAC members, and the chair will sit as an ex officio. If we do not have enough DAAC members with the availability of time to sit through another working group, is there a way for us to open the working group process to other members of the public who could participate in the working group, and is that an option before us?
I had not considered whether other members of the public would be part of the working groups. You know, certainly we can.
Is there anything that prohibits us from opening those working groups? Because they're going to be largely conversational. It's going to require a volunteer commitment of time and energy and passions.
I would think that my best recommendation on that would be on an invitation basis. You know, if there's somebody that has a specific experience, specific feedback that, you know, that they would like to bring into the okay. Then, yeah, I think that, you know, especially if there are, you know, expert stakeholders that can come, just as same as I saw the possibility of having employees in the city come and do presentations and ask for feedback on things that they're working on. There maybe makes sense to have community members that want to speak on the subject and bring their experience to us.
I think it would be recognized that the working groups would not have such a formal structure. And if the working group can even be opened up to perhaps members of the public service, some of the accessibility champions within the vision who could actually be right at the working group level, I think that may have some value. So if there's nothing that precludes us from actually inviting, you know, members to participate, the members that are not, individuals who are not members of the committee, I think that's something that we should explore. In the incident that we do not get enough DAAC members to populate a working group, okay? And perhaps, so as I see it, the chair, as chair, I provide you with a report. I give you a quick summary of the things that I've been doing between our meetings. There's a expectation that the working group will self-select a chair, and that person will also be coming back at the same time that my chair's report is to also deliver a quick summary of the process of work. Okay. Are there any other questions? Because I think it's almost time to wrap this item up. Joe.
Sorry about that.
If it's a question, then it's going to Nicole.
Well, okay, but I'm not sure this is a question necessarily pointed at Nicole, but more the committee, and that is, right now we have proposed two subcommittees, and I would like to know if the rest of the committee members are comfortable with just those two subcommittees, or whether we as a group would like to expand that into other subcommittees, and whether we should name those and decide on those as well today if we're talking about accepting these two particular subcommittees at this time.
I'm going to take a crack at answering that. I'm going to try. even when I was appointed to this committee, there were 4 working groups that were formalized working groups that were not meeting regularly. And there was, I couldn't find any report back mechanism, and I sort of scoured through the public records just to get a sense as the new chair, you know, what type of outstanding deliverables were there. And I realized that they were just not meeting, they were rather inactive. So perhaps what we can do is to start off with these 2, and we can actually repopulate and reconstitute other working groups as need be. Unless there is a specific topic that is not going to be covered by these 2 working groups that someone has a real burning desire to tackle, I don't see why we can't do that, but it needs to be resourced with a member or 2 to constitute the working group. And I don't know if staff is usually involved with those discussions. You are, okay. Then that means that Nicole will have to sit through this particular meeting as well as 2 additional working groups to provide resource and supports.
Oh.
So it's about capacity. Is there capacity and interest to start another working group? And if so, then what would that 3rd working group be? Recognizing that the 2 working groups that are before us as a recommendation has not even been constituted or populated.
So, sorry, I really have to speak now because I know that, I know I had spoken to both yourself and Nicole, like at the beginning of the, coming onto this committee again. And I know, I think I made it very clear, and I know there are some other people in the room that were also on the old committee with me. The groups that existed were the housing group, the transportation group, and the outreach group. So there were 3. I was the chair of the housing group, and we did report back. We absolutely reported back to the committee. We did make those meetings known and public, and I said to both of you at the time that I'm really sorry that you can't actually see those meeting minutes, and I know that they existed because I wrote them. Then I offered to go back and like look for those reports so that I could show them to you. I didn't do it, but I can still do that. The drawback for me in doing that was because they were from 2012. I know the Transportation Committee in particular, the chair of that one was, I believe, Tracy, and they had extensive reports that they worked on. Like, I just want to make that clear, that just because you guys didn't receive those reports for whatever reason, doesn't mean that those dates were published. And I see Lorraine like nodding her head. Those action items were made public, and they were quite consultative. And I know the outreach committee really struggled for a while about just like what their mandate was. They came back to the committee, they said, what should our mandate be? And at the end of the day, because the committee was changing again, we decided, okay, we don't want an outreach committee because we didn't they didn't have their goals together ever, even though they were meeting. They absolutely did have agenda items, but it got confusing. So I want to make that entirely clear. I've only been on this committee for one other term, but I feel like there were a lot of areas in which we did have our shit together. Like, I don't know how else to communicate that.
I'm just going to clarify, it's not to insinuate that you did or did not have your act together.
Yeah.
It had a lot to do with just record keeping and transparency. So just as much as my chair's report is circulated in advance, and I try to, and I recognize that that's something that I had begun, but I think that with respect to working groups, and it's actually a symptom of all working groups and subcommittees, is that sometimes you lose the memory and if it's not properly documented. So, and knowing that we're in a democratic process, you do have turnover. There's new members of this particular committee which are trying to get up to speed to understand what happened in the previous years. We will struggle if we don't have a proper mechanism for logging and reporting and ongoing archive documentation. So that's something that we can work through. I don't believe it's insurmountable, but it's just a gap in terms of how we report back. I want to almost wrap up this item, and Ian, I know are you interested in asking questions or speaking? No, I'm speaking. Okay, so can I move towards the speaking component of this item? Yeah, so we're ready to make statements. Yin, and then Joe, is that you nodding your head? Okay. Yin first, please.
Yes, I just want to say that the Transportation Subcommittee, what do you call it, we can go back and get the reports from Tracy, who is on this committee still, just not here today. I don't mind sticking with 2 working groups, perhaps the second one, to change the name to Education and Communications. I think it does suffice the awareness building component with education and communication, but it also gives us a mandate to really follow through with the city departments that are trying to make their communications accessible. To say that our this committee's, this sub-working group, education and awareness building, say we go with that name, that part of our mandate is to disseminate information to the public, to assist the city in connecting with our community. We are always willing to do that, but sometimes I feel that this job is offloaded to us. We are volunteer workers, our community are mostly unemployed, and it's just such tremendous task when I think we should help the city to do a better job of reaching our community. So I'd like to see this group as education and communications, mainly assisting the city doing a better job.
So just to clarify, Yin, that sounds to me like you're moving a motion, although it's not written down. We're just for members to follow. The motion is to change the name of the working group from education and awareness to education and communication without the S. Or do you want the S? Is it plurals? Plurals?
S, maybe.
Okay, so education and communications with the S. So that is the motion on the floor. Okay, anyone else to speak? I see Joe and then Councillor Layton. Joe, please.
Yeah. Since being on this committee, this is my first term, and I've seen quite a number of presentations on quite a wide variety and various aspects of what accessibility means in the city and in society in Toronto. And this committee, I look around the room and listen to people talk and see their experience, and you have a wide and vast array of individuals with disabilities who have lived experience in probably every aspect of everything that's been discussed. And they've all joined this committee to bring that to some sort of useful benefit to the committee and to the city. And as Yin said, to help the city move along these agendas. And I think it would be a mistake to sort of limit what this committee is going to do in terms of these various aspects, and to what the people around this committee table can bring to these different discussions and these different issues. So whatever the subcommittee names are, I'm not that concerned about what they are, but as long as each individual in this committee has the ability to spend as much of their own energy and time and effort and experience to, in whatever capacity on the subcommittee, on whatever topic, to the benefit of Toronto and society and accessibility at large. So I think we want to be careful, not because we have 2 names and we have 2 focuses, not to limit the various passions we have that we can bring beyond just those 2 names. So I think anyone at this table who has a particular passion, whether it's technology, education, awareness, housing, built environment, whatever it is, should find a place in any subcommittee where they can continue to express that and be a benefit. That's my comment.
Councillor Layton.
Thank you very much. Just on a couple of quick points. One on the naming of the working groups. It's been my experience that as long as there's not another working group covering off an issue, you can make the mandate of the working group that you're on be anything you can try to justify within a reasonable definition. And so certainly communications would work in there. It's always great to have more focused names. I don't think that that this committee will be accused of having a more focused name than our committee name, but we really should and can allow for these working groups to have to explore other issues that that can be brought to this committee, and that's why they can be quite useful. Also on the working groups, I really think it's a good opportunity for us to bring in people that aren't on this committee. This committee's number is limited, and partly because we want to have continuity at all the meetings, and we want to make sure that everyone's on the same page. But having working groups, opening that up, not only brings in additional expertise, but also allows us to do some succession planning, to have the next round of members of this committee ready in the wings to move in and have some institutional knowledge and some understanding of how the city and this committee work. I don't know if we'll need to do that through a motion or not, by adding it as a bullet point that working group membership be opened to non-members of the committee, but I don't know if we do. Having said that, on the 1B on establishing other working groups, I've just come off about 1.5 years or 2 years of helping develop the Aboriginal employment strategy, and if as we heard in the last item, that our strategy at the city for recruiting people with disabilities isn't working, then perhaps that's another one that we could do. There is some expertise, I think, outside the committee, and there may very well be on the committee, about how we can address some of those issues. Agencies in particular serving clients with disabilities that are employment agencies may be very useful in this regard. You know, our application process on the bottom of every work application says we are an open employer, and we value diversity in our employment strategy, but then there's nothing on the application when you're actually applying to identify yourself as being of a visible minority, being an Aboriginal person, or being disabled. And so there's no way of the person going through the thousands, and they get thousands of applications per position, there's no way of them identifying which individuals, and that was probably a good thing at one point in time when we were trying to discourage a selection process that perhaps was not open to everyone, in fact discriminating against individuals. But now when we're trying to actively change the makeup of our public service, we may in fact need to have that opposite piece. And so we've developed some strategies within the Aboriginal community to ensure that when the selection process is being undertaken, that individuals that identify themselves as Aboriginal are identifiable within the hiring process. And that has helped. We've hired several individuals that identify as Aboriginal in that time. And that's been working very closely with Aboriginal employment service agencies. So that is just some suggestions, but perhaps a working group could be established in that regard that might take that task on. And maybe it's a short-lived working group. Maybe it helps develop the bare bones of a strategy with our HR professionals and then dissolves and moves on.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Anybody else to speak? Wendy.
Thank you. So this actually leads into my thinking around this issue, and it was to say that I was disappointed to see that there was no employment working group. And I think in particular because we were just talking about today, a youth with disabilities targeted program where we saw very few people hired. We've heard from Nicole today about the numbers of inquiries that you get around accommodations for people who are working for the public service. So this is a really significant issue. And when we consider the unemployment rates of people with disabilities, flat out, that we are severely underemployed. And in the rationale, when it sort of says, well, in the document that you produced, where the rationale is to say why we shouldn't have an employment group is that HR is AODA compliant. And, we all know AODA compliance is a lot more nuanced than that, right? And to be human rights compliant comes down to the level of the individual and whether or not that person is being accommodated to the level of undue hardship or not, right? So it's actually, to say it's just compliant and therefore we're not going to talk about it, I find a little bit confusing. So, but I appreciate concerns around capacity. And, how are the groups going to run? How are you going to sit in on multitudes of groups? I haven't been here before. I might be talking myself out of an employment group. I think an employment group is significant, though, but I don't want to chair it. Maybe that's what I'm saying. But I want to put that out there, that I was disappointed to see that the employment group wasn't listed, particularly with some of the comments that Councillor Layton's made, too, around, how do we identify people with disabilities? When we were here and we heard the presentation from recruitment strategies that target equity-seeking groups, we also learned in that presentation that we don't know how many people with disabilities work for the city. So there are some fundamental questions here that are not answered that I think an employment working group actually would significantly contribute to. So I think I'm coming out in favor of one.
Coming out in favor of one, are you proposing to amend the staff recommendations to construct 2 working groups and to add a 3rd? Or do you want to think about that? Okay. Terry Lynn to speak.
I think, again, not to take words out of your mouth, Wendy, but at the last meeting, Wendy's original request was to have everyone kind of talk about which working groups that they would like. And when I say past, I mean in the last committee, that's how we decided on the groups. The other piece is that because I haven't said it, I feel it's really important for me to say I actually really support people coming on externally. I like that idea. And I don't think anyone from diversity and inclusion necessarily has to be at those committee groups. I think you just, if I may, I think you do need a chair for each of the committee group and like someone who's going to write the minutes, but I don't think it needs to be that Nicole is attending every single one. I think what is useful is for a staff member from diversity and inclusion to be available if there is like a snag or if a group is working on a motion or something and they're having trouble sort of working that out. I think it's important for that to occur. But I did want to just say, and also that if we do open up the subgroups to be to the public, I'm hesitant to support an idea of invitation only, just because I feel like that might actually tap into the same people once again. But I don't have a grand plan about how to make that not resource intensive.
I think I could probably even clarify. I was given a note from the clerk that we cannot officially appoint members of the public to working groups. However, we can involve and consult other people and invite groups and members of the public as required. But when it comes to working groups making decisions, that is only the responsibility and the burden and the obligation and the right of the members of the ACT committee. Okay, so it means that we can bring anybody we want into those discussions. So it
right? Like, because that means they would give us their reports and then that would help inform our decision.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, anyone else to speak? Any other? No one else to speak. So then I believe we have one motion on the floor right now, and it's the motion from Yin. I'm going to just read it to refresh. That recommendation 1 in the report be amended by changing the working group name, Education and Awareness, to Education and Communications. And that is the motion. So we're not necessarily adding another group, but I think that this discussion is not necessarily closed, and we'll look forward to seeing all sorts of enthusiastic volunteer step forward to populate the working groups and then begin your work. And I'll look forward to receiving those reports, preferably against at least 1 week prior to the Day Act meeting, so we can get all typed up. All in favor of Yin's motion? Raise your hand and indicate your support. Thank you, so passed. And then the motion, sorry, the report as amended. Indicate your support, and so adopted. Thank you very much. So that concludes the end of meeting number 11 of DAYAC. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy your long Labor Day weekend.